Hello, listener. Welcome back to the Inspired Writer Collective podcast. I'm one of your co hosts, Stephanie, and I'm here today with Jared. And we're going to have a great conversation about all things writing. And so, Jared, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience?
Thank you, Stephanie. Hello, everybody. Again, my name is Jared. I'm an author, editor, playwright, screenwriter, and stage director. A little bit of everything in the creative space. I love that it gives so much opportunity for me to do so many different things and tell stories in so many different ways. So, yeah, I'm always excited to talk about stories and writing, and do your best to try to keep me from talking for too long because this stuff really gets me going. But yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, we're excited to have you today. And I know you do have such passion for what you do, which is wonderful. And I think that the listeners will get a real sense of that. So I know when we talked the other day, Elizabeth had talked about she had connected with you on Threads because she was really curious about how you had talked about a shift in your writing process. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. I was responding to a post, a thread about process and about just different ways that people approach it. And you don't know that what you're saying is unique until sometimes until you say it. To me, it's normal because I'm used to it. I discovered now as I'm about to publish my second book, and my first book came out a year ago, June 1st. I learned that my process changes depending on the story I'm telling, so that it wasn't so much about, oh, I have to make sure I have this pen and this type of paper or use this program or software. The things that I did for my first book worked very well. The book was had gotten great response has gotten great responses and feedback, and I love it. And it's my baby. That first one is very special to you. And I tried to use that same process with my second book, and it was not going well. It was not. I was normally I'm a write by hand, yellow legal pad with a G2 pen guy. I tried doing that for this next one, and my brain just could not get out of park. Everything felt stagnant. I couldn't figure it out. I got so frustrated. I just sat down and started typing on the computer, almost stream of consciousness style, and then it started to flow. So I wrote my first draft on the computer, which I normally never do,
Yeah.
and it ended up working out. And then now, as I'm working on a third book and my second book is in edits, I'm rediscovering an entirely new process. So it's really about what does it take, not for me to tell a story, but for what does it take for this story to get told in the best way possible by me. So I had to start listening to the demands of the work instead of assuming what it was going to require. And that just creates a whole new space for discovery, right?
Yeah.
I'm discovering the story and discovering me at the same time. So it's a fun process, but that's how I first connected with you all.
Well, that's so cool to hear about having a different approach to your process. I think probably encouraging to some of our listeners that there isn't one way to do writing, which I know Elizabeth and I talk about that all the time too, that there's not one way to do it. So I think it's really interesting that you've discovered how the story comes through you and how it wants to appear in the world. That's so interesting.
Yeah,
So
I've always thought about it as no matter what somebody is seeking out, it's always it depends. That's the first part of my response. If you're like, oh, what's the best writing advice for this thing and this thing, and I'm like, it depends. I've got a lot more questions before I can even then I'm going to give you an answer, and they're like, but try whatever works because I don't know. It's and I love that it's kind of a fingerprint kind of experience.
yeah, no, I think that that's so great because I think there's so much noise out there on
Mhm.
the internet about, well, this is the way you do it. Or, I mean, I know people who are very academic about it who are saying, well, this is the way you do it. And I think sometimes new writers, especially, get really overwhelmed hearing that.
Absolutely, and I think because I didn't start out with prose, because I got my start with stage plays, and even before that, as a teenager with poetry, I didn't know what it felt like to have rules. I kind of was, my mentors always made it a point to not put too many restrictions on how, so I didn't know what the supposed to was when I found a story that I knew wouldn't work as a stage play. And I said, well, how else can I write it? And that's what made me decide to write a book. That was it. It was really that simple. And then it was like, I didn't go around looking for what's the right way to do this? How do I start? I just kind of said, I'm going to do what I normally do. I'm going to outline a story. I'm going to come up with an idea. I'm going to create some characters. Then this happens, then this happens, and this happens, and see where it kind of takes me. And that allowed me to find me and the way that I need to write. And I think that's, you speak perfectly to that of, if you get too caught up in the noise and that initial anxiety around making sure you're doing it right, I think make sure you're doing it first, and then we can think about the ways we can get better at it. Because I'd love for my first book to be the worst book I ever write.
I love that advice about just, get busy doing it and then figure it out as you go. So I'm sure our listeners are curious to know, what genre do you write in? What brings you inspiration for your books?
Yeah, I'm a love story writer, uh, distinct from romance writer, because I don't want to adhere to what type of ending there needs to be. Um, and I think love stories are way more so broad, and it can encompass so many things. And I just love love. I've always loved love as a subject. That's the most common thing I've written about, no matter what genre or medium that I was using. And I usually just get inspired by the the questions in life that don't have clear answers, and this is my way to explore them. So I don't think that I know everything. I don't think I know many things, and I think the best stories for me are the ones that come from curiosity or create curiosity. It's not a this is what happens if you do this. It's a, well, I wonder what would happen if I did this, or I wonder what would happen if this person met this person and put them together, and then let their relationship talk to me and see what comes out of that. I find that exciting. I find it exciting to not know what's next, to not know what to do, to not know how things will play out. My first book, I wrote it, and then I got to the end, thought I was done, sent it to the editor. About a week later, while I was taking my mandatory break between projects that I give myself, it struck me that the story wasn't done, and that I was trying to write an ending. And if there's one thing I learned about myself, is that I don't write endings, I just stop writing. And I had more inside, and that's why the ending didn't feel right. So I just kept going and added another 2.5 chapters until I was like, no, I think this is it now. And that ended up being the ending, and it was much stronger for it. So I'm really just inspired by not knowing anything, and inspired by trying to find things out and not being afraid to say, I don't know, I'm good, but we'll see. I think that's probably the main thing that drives my inspiration.
I love that because I know I'm also a fiction writer and I'm writing romance, but I that piece of sitting down and not knowing where it's going, it does have sort of a thrill and an excitement to it. And do you find when you're writing with your characters that you can really feel them coming through you and that they almost become real to you?
Not almost. Uh, I often say, like, if one of my characters walked in this room right now, I would recognize them. I can hear their voices. I can pick out their clothes. I once saw someone who I was certain was one of my characters on a subway train, and almost had a panic attack
Oh my
because
goodness.
because it was very, very real. And I'm like, this woman's gonna freak out if I go up to her and tell her, like, I see you in my head all the time. It's like, I hear your voice when I when I try to go to sleep at night.
Right.
Um, but what it allows me to do is, I think that my greatest trait as a writer is that I pay attention. Um, and I think that because I'm paying attention and I'm listening all the time, it allows the characters to move organically through a story. So yeah, I'm creating them, but at the same time, I'm really just listening to them. I I don't start putting them on a page until they feel very real to me. And then once they feel real, I feel more like a stenographer than a writer. I'm just like, well, they're in a room and they're talking to each other. I'm just listening to it and writing it down. I know it can sound kind of like, "Ugh," like, a little nutty, and maybe it's one of those things only other writers really get. Like, I know you
Yeah.
understand
No, I get what you're
what I mean.
saying. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
so that's how it is in my head, and I'm thankful that art is a thing. Otherwise, I'd probably be in a straitjacket or something.
no, and so it sounds like your characters come to you very organically. Do you do any kind of character sketch or anything beforehand, or is it just that you decide, who they are and then say, "Let's see how this plays out"?
So the first thing that comes to me is their voice, like the way they speak, not just the
Oh,
sound of it, but the way that they speak. And it's usually not in a chronological sense. There's a scene or a moment that pops into my head, and I can see their face and I can hear their voice and the way they say this thing, and then that's where it begins. So there's no telling, excuse me, there's no telling where that scene will be, but wherever it is, I start working my way backward and say, okay, well, how did they get here? How did they get to this moment? So in my first book, I'm not spoiling anything, but there's a moment where the female main character says, "Just tell me that I'm not in this alone." That was the first thing I heard. That I
mm.
didn't have a title. I didn't know this woman's name. I didn't know anything. The first thing I heard was, "Just tell me that I'm not in this alone." And I worked my way back from there. I'm like, well, how was she saying it? And why was she saying it this way? And who was she saying it to? So it was just one morsel, and then it turned into 70,000 words. And that's kind of how it begins. It really starts that way with me just about every time. I hear a line or I hear a moment or see a moment in my head, and then I just build out from there.
Do you find that because you started with poetry, which is very almost has a conversational piece to it, and then into stage, right, into screenplays, that that really helped you create that dialogue and build the voice?
Absolutely. If there's one thing I feel comfortable writing, it's dialogue. It really was an adjustment trying to write, the show don't tell, the expository stuff. But when it comes down to just put two people in a room with something that they want and something that's in their way, and have them start talking, that's flowing. I can't write as fast as my brain can think it in that moment. The parts that slow me down is getting to those conversations, getting to those moments. Um, because I love poetry so much, and I'm a big Shakespeare nut, and
Yeah.
Pablo Neruda, and
Mhm.
John Donne, and Yeats, and a lot of that, especially a lot of that old Irish poetry, which is very, some would call it macabre, but I just call it very deeply felt. They're
Yeah.
very emotional. And I love that they spoke with such raw energy and they managed to convey a lot without saying a lot sometimes. That kind of got me started on what are the most effective ways to express these incredibly complex emotions. And then that transitioned me into stage plays, which are really just all talking. If you learn dialogue very quickly when you're working in theater. Um, and that kind of turned into my graduate school of expression. And I don't just write that way, I speak that way in my life. The people in
Mhm.
my life will tell you that I talk the same way that I write, in that I want to make sure that my words matter and I don't just say anything. So makes me put a lot of thought into the way we express ourselves, the ways we listen and hear each other, and make me much more thoughtful about the way those pieces fit, the puzzles fit between two characters. So that's part of what makes it my favorite thing to write, is because I really learned so much about the story and who the characters are and how they move through their worlds and into each other, just by the way that they speak and the way that they listen.
That sounds so great because I know especially with, love stories and, uh, that having dialogue to move it along can be so powerful because you do really get a sense of that emotional connection that happens between the characters.
Yeah, absolutely. It's what the way I like to think about it is, what would this person want to say? What would this character want to say? And then what are they going to say instead? So the thing that I know is internal, they're not going to say that. I'm not writing that. I know what it
Right.
is, and they know what it is, but that's not what's going on the page. At least not till later. At some point, to me, the climax is when people are honest with each other. That to me
Mhm.
is the climax of a love story. When people finally say the thing that they really wanted to say, and how many different ways can they avoid saying it until neither side can take it anymore, and then the cup runneth over. So that's usually my first part of that desire, and what's getting in the way is, what does this person really want to say more than anything, and then how many different ways can I think of, come up with, to make them avoid saying it until the very end.
That sounds like a great writing challenge. I like that. I like that because it's so I mean, it's so true, and it's so true in, so many different genres across the board of,
Mhm.
building that tension and until it finally all blows up. So, um, yeah, no, I think that that's wonderful. So I know one of the other things that you feel really passionate about. It's about having a community of writers.
Mhm.
And how has that helped you as a writer to make sure that you're surrounding yourself with, people to help you along the way?
Well, I think one of the biggest misconceptions about being a writer is that it has to be a lonely or endeavor. I even had that same feeling when I was younger because there weren't many people that were thinking about it the way I was thinking about it or aspiring to this as a career, as a calling, really. And the one thing that I've learned along the way is I thrive in being able to kind of mind meld with other writers. I love having conversations about story. In case it's not apparent, I love talking about stories with anybody, but especially with other writers. And I get better and I get stronger and my skills get sharper just from keeping my mind locked in, keyed in on that vibe. And the more time you spend around it, I have a men's book club that revolves around, we alternate between nonfiction, fiction, and a memoir. And we had a great discussion recently about a nonfiction book, in which one of the discussion points was about not tolerating mediocrity in your circle. Because you should
Mhm.
always have people around you that are aspiring to more and are seeing greater for themselves and for you. And that's part of how that book club started. But that's what I want to create in writer community. It's not about the quality of the writer. It's about the aspiration. It's about the commitment to the craft of it. And that the more people I have around me like that, the stronger I get. And I hope the stronger it makes them. So I've joined writer communities and tried to be a part of writer communities and then eventually began one of my own, a Saturday Zoom room with lots of people, most of whom I've never met in person, who we get together for 1 hour every Saturday, and I bring prompts, and we can share if we want to. We can not share if we don't want to. There's no expectation either way. But a big part of it is that we feel things. I think one of the the biggest things that I'm always trying to bring to the community is that the first rule of any artist is to be honest, and not just mean don't lie, because I don't think it's that simple. It's about bringing all of yourself to the fore and being willing to feel things at their full depth, and that's a lot. That's
Mhm.
that's not easy. If it were easy, a lot more people would be doing it, and we know that's not the
Absolutely.
case. Right? So I want to create a space where people can come and do that and support other people in doing that, because it's not about making you a better writer. It's about making you closer to yourself, and that in turn will inevitably make you a better writer. So you'll get there, but I'm not trying to turn people into better writers. You don't even have to be a writer to show up. You just have to have things you want to feel and try to find a new way to explore them. My book cover artist is in the group, and she is a self-proclaimed non-writer, and she's a photographer and digital artist and graphic designer. She had to be convinced to show up to a writing group, and I said, I think you'll really enjoy it. There's people that are published like myself, and there's people who have no intention on ever publishing anything. They just like the space and like to feel things and have felt the benefit from it. And I don't think you can get that without community. I don't think you can become as strong as you can be as a writer without community.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I mean, we talk about that all the time on this podcast about the value of community because, we find it amongst ourselves and just the huge benefits that come from, like you said, pushing you to that next level, whatever it is for yourself. And I appreciate what you said about, thinking about who you surround yourself with because that can be so important for moving you forward. And I think that it's really helpful for writers to hear about all the benefits you can get from, whoever you surround yourself with and making sure you're purposeful in that choice. So that sounds like a wonderful community that you've built.
Absolutely, and I'm incredibly grateful for all the people that are a part of it. Um, and this kind of unintended beautiful thing that has become a staple in my life, that now is a given that this is where I'm going to be for an hour on Saturdays. And it's I've been touched by the feedback from them about how it impacted the rest of the way they move through the world. Because I think that's kind of what we want art to do, right? We want
Yeah.
art to have that feeling, have that impact on people, and to get to see it so up close and in a way that, because social media community is great, But you spoke to something that I think is really important about it, and there's an intention about it. It's not just enough for us to be liking each other's posts or rooting for each other with some emojis in the comment section. It's like, hey, let's get together and let's just talk about writing. Like, you could have asked me to have this conversation just to have the conversation. I don't even have to know you have a podcast. And I'd be like,
Right.
sure, just tell me when and where you want to talk about it. Because I love it and I love that other people love it. And I want to be around the people that love it so we can both love it more. And I think that intentionality is important, to put a face to the feelings, put a voice to it, instead of us just talking at each other in this cacophony of social media. I love that when people are like, no, let's take it a step further. Let's connect. Let's beta read for each other. Let's share feedback. Let's share processes. Let's find ways to sharpen each other for the sake of what we're trying to build.
Well, and I think it's so great too, because sometimes you never know, who you can connect with in those spaces, who you can share interests. I mean, just unexpected things can so often happen. And that's one of the wonderful things about finding other people who share in the joy of what you love to do.
Absolutely. I mean, I stumbled into having this opportunity to create a community because I agreed. I just said yes to attending something that a good friend of mine, Amber Ray, who's a best-selling memoir author herself, she said, "Hey, can you show up to this writing workshop thing that I'm doing and kind of just, help support what's going on?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." I had no expectations. It's me and 34 women in this space. It's a space dominated by women,
Yeah.
and before I knew it, I suddenly was making these great connections with people, and it was like, hey, we should keep in touch. And next thing you know, here we are meeting every Saturday, and them trusting me to create a space for them to give of those emotions. It's helped improve my writing drastically, just because it's hard to write love stories and then spend time around so many people who are so different than you and not gain greater perspective. I mean, the biggest compliment I got from my first book was women telling me how much they related to my female main character, and that's directly attributed to how much time I was raised by women.
Mm,
Most of my close friends are women, and all the people in this group are women, and I'm paying attention, or trying to do my best to pay attention. I won't pretend that I do it perfectly all the time, but I take a lot of pride in, like, I want this to feel like a whole person that another woman can see themselves in. And I don't want to be the guy that looks like he's trying to write a female character and end up in a YouTube video getting criticized about it. I want it to be
yeah.
like, hey, here's an entire human being who happens to be a woman. And I don't pretend to know everything about anyone or anything, but I think that's part of what helps,
Yeah.
is that I'm willing to listen and explore rather than pretend that I know how to write women or even how to write men, because I'm just one person. And
Right.
I don't think a book is interesting if there are two me's trying to fall in love with each other. I I need to find ways to create more dynamics with people, and there's no better way to do that than through community, just from getting to know as many people as possible.
Yeah, I think that that's so great because I think that it's so important for writers to be observers. I mean, I know that I'm always an observer and, I write in coffee shops a lot just so that I can, eavesdrop or watch people or watch dynamics, and it can be so inspirational and you can find different things that maybe you didn't expect or come up with different ideas, when you're in community. So one of the things
Absolutely.
that you mentioned briefly was about, in your group, you don't do feedback, but, um, what are places where you've looked for feedback, or how has feedback helped you with your process?
In wonderful ways. So I have some very trusted alpha readers, who helped me out early in the process. People who read the genres that I'm writing for and are fans of them, and also are not afraid to be completely honest with me. Shout out to Natalie, because she's my main. That's my main number one woman right there. For She's not afraid to let somebody know, like, hey, this really could use some work, or hey, this really resonates. She
Mhm.
helped give me the confidence to even venture out. I wrote the first 6 chapters, and I said, okay, before I go any further, I just need someone to tell me that I'm not terrible at this. And I handed it to her, and it was the most tense 3 days that I have felt in a long time before she got back to me and supported me. And I know this is actually really, really excellent. And that really got me going. I have an incredible editor and writing coach in Megan McLean, who I cannot speak more highly of. as far as another person that's a wonderful listener, and to really have somebody that grasps what you're trying to do. Um, I can say that as an editor myself, how important that is to really have somebody to say, not just is this good or isn't it. Tell me, is this what? Tell me what I'm trying to do, and tell me what this needs for me to get there. So that's another probably very strong area where I get feedback. She also runs writing community every Thursday night, where I can bring passages and get feedback from other writers while they also do the same, and I can give feedback. So I do try to balance it, the no stakes writing with feedback writing, because I do think it's not a great idea to overwhelm yourself with too much feedback, because then we can't please everybody, and if you try, you're going to write something really terrible. So at a certain point, you got to know when to cut yourself off and say, I think I've heard enough
Hmm.
about this piece, and some of it is I have to trust my gut. But there's an incredible value to me in feedback and being able to take feedback, which I think is an underrated part of being a writer. As so many people are trying to do it, it's great that the barrier for entry is so much lower than it's ever been. But then some people are trying to do it without having that element, and I don't think they realize, as bad as it might feel, and as hard as it is to hear sometimes, that this needs work, or you need to revamp this chapter, or you might need to overhaul this act of the book. It's also going to make your writing so much stronger when you swallow those razor blades and dive in and do it. I'm dealing with that right now with my editor. Megan gave me notes, and I said it was 3 steps. The first step is, why would I change that? The second step is okay, fine, whatever. I'll change it. And the third step is, well, I'll be damned. She was right. This is way way better. So you can get so much stronger and really see the wealth of your full potential through feedback. And it's better to get it before you publish it than to be staring down the barrel of a bunch of 1-star reviews on Amazon
Yeah.
after the fact. So yeah, I embrace feedback.
So have you found over the course of your different books that have you seen your writing grow and change with, or is each story so different that it's a different approach each time?
It's a combination of the two. I can certainly see areas where, because I had to look back at my first book for a later project, um, I almost didn't recognize certain parts of it, that I was like, I can't believe that I wrote that. Not necessarily because it was bad, just because it was
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
And I was like, I just because I know, even if I said the same thing, I know I wouldn't say it this way now. But that's also part of what I love about the humanity of it, is I can chart my growth through that, because now I'm writing my third book currently, and I can already see, oh, I was about to do this. Like, no, first book Jared would have done this. Third book Jared is doing something a little bit differently, or I can feel the characters in a different way. It No matter how many times I do it, I don't. If I ever felt like I was used to it, then something has gone horribly wrong for me along the way. So I like the feeling of, like, there's something new for me to learn here. There's something new for me to discover, and at the core of it, I'm still trying to explore a different question with every piece. So it shouldn't feel familiar. And then for me personally, the familiar is the enemy of good. So I want to make sure that I am always putting myself in places where I'm not necessarily sure where this is going, and I'm not positive that I can pull this off, but I'm going to try it anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's such a great, mindset to have going into a writing project, because I think too often they're writers that wanna feel like they have it all figured out from the start, that they wanna have that perfect outline, or they wanna know every little bit, and it just sounds, so inspiring listening to you about just approaching it with this mindset of, "What can I learn from this? What can, make me better? How is this gonna challenge me?"
Yeah, I think that one thing I did learn from the way I grew up, and I spent a lot of time to myself and by myself, is that some of the most important work is done in the shadows. Like, it's great to have. I certainly value community, but part of why I value it is because of how much time I spent alone for so long trying to do this. And there's so many things that you have to feel in private, things that you have to say to yourself, things you have to hear yourself say, things you have to make sure you never hear yourself say. And if you're not, I believe, and because I'm always big on the it depends, and this isn't for everybody.
Yeah.
I believe that you will be as strong a creative as you are willing to meet yourself. And that the deeper you're willing to go internally, the more that you'll be able to find to bring out to the world. And it's ultimately that's what we're doing, right? That was Hemingway that said, "There's
Yep.
not much to writing. You just sit down at a typewriter and bleed." That's ultimately what we're doing.
Yep.
We're giving of
Absolutely.
ourselves for the consumption of others, and that's a difficult thing. That's a scary thing
Hmm.
because most of the world is about you trying to find or us trying to find ways to not be our full selves in full view of everybody. And we're like, hey, we're gonna sign up for it and then ask you to pay for it. Like that's a whole other level of it. But it's like the characters, right? Like I mentioned before. There's what the character wants to say, and then there's that character's gonna say instead. We're trying to say what we really want to say and hopefully not be torn apart for it or be okay with the possibility of being torn apart for it. So I had a client just briefly that I just finished editing her latest draft, and at the end she was kind of like not upset, but you could tell she was in her head and was feeling dejected. You can tell when somebody's on the brink of like maybe I can't do this,
Hmm.
and I was like, let me just make sure I slow you down for a moment and explain something to you. You had an idea and you saw it through to the end and you finished it. You have already advanced past 95% of anybody who ever thought about writing a book in the first place. And I'm not saying that it needs to be a competition. I'm saying it because that's a reality. We
Yep.
can't throw a rock without hitting somebody that said they wanted to write a book or they thought about writing a book at some point. No
That's
judgment to
true.
them.
Yeah.
This is not an easy thing to do.
No, it's
So
not.
so when you get to the end, even if you never publish it, even if you never fine tune it, even if you just get from once upon a time to the end, you have done something incredible. And that's enough for some people, and that's totally fine. There's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with that. But allow yourself to feel that feeling that comes with seeing it all the way through to the end. In my author's note in my first book, I put a message when it was basically like, what was the main thing that I learned? That was what my mentor said I should try to focus my author's note on. And the main message of my author's note is finish what you started. And that's what I carry through to every project now. Is like if I'm gonna dare to say I'm gonna step forward and say I am with this book, then I owe it to myself to see it all the way through to the end. I come from too long a line of very strong people who have been through all kinds of things way more difficult than writing a book for me to ever dare say, oh no, I don't believe in myself enough to put words on a page in a way that makes people feel things. It's compared to the other things that I've had to endure just in my own life, this is
Mhm.
the easy part. And I know I'm not the only person that feels that way and has experienced a life like that. So that's usually what I tell people is there's such beautiful value in finishing what you started. Allow yourself to have that beauty.
That's amazing, and you've given so many great, bits of wisdom throughout our talk today. So, what would be, one thing or, a collection of things that you would give to a new writer who's listening, who is afraid to start or not sure if they should start?
I'm gonna try my best to pick one. I would say the first thing is okay, I'll give two things. One
Okay.
that's interpersonal and then one that's craft based. So the interpersonal one is be willing to go deep within yourself. You cannot hide on the page. So you have to be willing to go to a place that might be uncomfortable and there may be some work you need to do before you even pick up the pen to be ready. So be honest with yourself about how ready you are as a person to go down this road. And if that means finding out from other writers what this really looks like, finding out from other writers what this really entails, not just the parts we're willing to post on social media, but the uglier parts, those moments of self doubt. We've all had that moment where we're
Mhm.
ready to highlight the whole project and hit delete. Talk about all of those moments with and then the craft part, excuse me, the craft part of it is I think there's a skill to this that is underrated until somebody tries to go do it. And a lot of people treat it as if, well, I know English, so I can tell a story. Having an MFA and being a good storyteller are not directly linked. One might help, but that's not how this works. It's not a one to one
Mhm.
thing because storytelling is its own craft. It involves the English language or whatever language you write in. It involves language and words, but there is a craft to it. Be willing to learn. Be willing to acknowledge how little you know. How little you know. Read other authors that are writing your genre. Read stories that are like the ones you want to write. Read the stories that made you feel something and figure out why they made you feel something. And then see the stories in everything. I'm talking about I watch movies and TV. I read tons of books. I play video games. There are stories all around And I don't just seek out the ones that I'm familiar with. I'm seeking out stories that I have nothing in common with, just so I can find out more ways that people can feel things. I learned so much about love through stories that aren't about love. So there's so much out there. So I think that's the craft part of it is be willing to learn and see the opportunities to learn in everything around you.
Well, Jared, this was such a wonderful conversation today, and I'm so glad that we've connected with you. And thank you so much for being a guest today.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm really glad that we got to do this. I'm invigorated. I feel like writing right now.